There comes a moment in life when running no longer feels like freedom, when the doors you kept open for escape quietly close behind you, when the silence you once chose begins to speak louder than any argument ever did. And in that moment, something shifts, because avoidance may delay pain, but it never deletes consequence. You see, escape feels powerful at first. It gives the illusion of control. It whispers, "I don't have to deal with this now." But what it doesn't tell you is that every time you avoid what matters, you are also avoiding who you are becoming. And while you're busy protecting yourself from discomfort, you may be abandoning something sacred that was entrusted to you. Some people don't realize what they had because they never stayed long enough to steward it. They confuse distance with peace, silence with strength, and detachment with wisdom. But wisdom doesn't run. Wisdom stands still long enough to be accountable. Purpose doesn't hide. Purpose shows up even when it's uncomfortable. There are relationships you don't lose because they were broken. You lose them because you wouldn't fight for them. You wouldn't communicate. You wouldn't confront. You wouldn't stay present when presence was required. And one day, you wake up and realize the person you thought would always be there learned how to live without you. That's not punishment, that's order. Because everything valuable operates under divine principles. What you neglect does not remain neutral. What you ignore does not stay frozen in time. What you refuse to water will eventually stop growing. And when something stops growing, it doesn't always die loudly. Sometimes it fades quietly, until one day it's gone. Avoidance teaches people how to move on without explanation. It teaches them how to stop expecting, how to stop waiting, how to stop hoping. And when they finally leave, the avoidant is often shocked, not because they didn't see it coming, but because they never thought consequence would arrive so faithfully. But here's the deeper truth. Realization is not condemnation. It's invitation. The moment someone recognizes that escape cost them something meaningful is the moment growth becomes possible. Because loss has a voice, and if you listen closely, it's not saying you're finished. It's saying, learn. Learn that connection requires courage. Learn that love demands presence. Learn that emotional maturity isn't found in disappearing, but in staying when it would be easier to go. Learn that responsibility is not a burden. It is the price of intimacy. And to the one who was left behind, understand this: you were not too much. You were just asking for something that required depth. You were asking for consistency, communication, and commitment. And anyone who must escape those things was never prepared to sustain what you offered. Sometimes God removes you from someone's life not because you lacked value, but because they lacked readiness. And when they finally realize what they lost, it won't be because you proved your worth. It will be because absence clarified it. So let loss do its work. Let realization shape character. Let regret become wisdom. And let this truth settle deep within you. What you refuse to face today will eventually stand in front of you tomorrow, asking for payment. And growth always collects its due. Avoidance is often dressed up as a personality trait, a coping mechanism, or even a form of self-care, but at its core it is a choice. It is not something that happens to a person. It is something a person repeatedly decides. While circumstances can influence fear, discomfort, or hesitation, they do not remove responsibility. Every time someone chooses silence over honesty, distance over dialogue, or escape over engagement, they are exercising their will. And every choice, whether acknowledged or ignored, carries weight. Many people say, "That's just how I am," as if avoidance were a fixed condition, rather than a practiced behavior. But patterns are learned, reinforced, and maintained. What you practice becomes your reflex. Avoidance is not a prison you were born into. It is a door you walk through again and again because it feels safer than standing still and facing what demands growth. The danger is not in the first step away, but in the comfort that follows it. Comfort has a way of numbing awareness, convincing you that nothing is being lost while something invaluable is slowly slipping through your hands. Avoidance feels protective because it reduces immediate tension. It keeps emotions from rising, conversations from becoming uncomfortable, and accountability from knocking at the door. But protection without purpose becomes self-sabotage. When someone avoids responsibility, they are not avoiding consequence, they are postponing it. Time does not erase unresolved matters. It simply allows them to mature, deepen, and eventually demand a higher price. There is a quiet deception in avoidance. It convinces a person that leaving is the same as being strong, that disengaging is the same as having boundaries, that silence is wisdom. But true strength requires presence. Boundaries require communication. Wisdom requires discernment, not disappearance. Walking away from what challenges you does not make you free, it often makes you smaller. You may feel relief in the moment, but relief is not the same as peace. Peace comes from alignment, not evasion. When someone avoids addressing issues, they are also avoiding their own development. Growth is forged in moments of tension, not comfort. Maturity is shaped when a person learns to sit in discomfort long enough to understand it, articulate it, and respond with integrity. Avoidance interrupts this process. It keeps people emotionally underdeveloped, relationally shallow, and spiritually stagnant. They may move forward in life, but inwardly, they remain stuck at the point they refuse to confront. Every relationship, calling, and responsibility requires stewardship. What is not stewarded will eventually be withdrawn. When someone avoids showing up consistently, communicating clearly, or taking ownership, they signal unreliability. Over time, trust erodes not because of one dramatic failure, but because of repeated absences. People stop leaning in, they stop expecting, they stop investing, and eventually they stop offering access. The most sobering part of avoidance is that it often goes unnoticed by the one practicing it until the cost becomes visible. By the time realization arrives, the damage has already been done. The opportunity has passed. The connection has shifted. The door that once remained open out of grace is now closed out of wisdom. And the avoidant is left trying to understand how something slipped away without a fight, not realizing that the absence of engagement was the fight they refused to show up for. Choice always precedes outcome. Avoidance is not an accident, and neither is loss. One is the seed, the other the harvest, and while grace may delay consequence, it does not eliminate the law of cause and effect. What a person continually chooses shapes what they eventually live with. Silence is never empty. It always carries instruction. When someone chooses not to speak, not to explain, not to confront what needs attention, they are still communicating something. Silence teaches people how to interpret their worth, their safety, and their place in your life. What you refuse to address today becomes the very thing that defines tomorrow's distance. Many believe that silence keeps the peace, but in reality, it often transfers the burden. Instead of resolving tension, silence relocates it, placing it on the shoulders of the other person. They are left to interpret tone, absence, and emotional withdrawal. Over time, that uncertainty becomes heavier than any difficult conversation ever would have been. People can handle truth. What erodes them is confusion. Silence has a way of reshaping expectations. When communication stops, hope slowly adjusts downward. At first there is patience, then there is waiting, after that there is disappointment, eventually there is acceptance, not the kind that heals but the kind that detaches. Silence teaches people how to stop reaching out, how to stop asking, how to stop believing change is coming. And once that lesson is learned, it is rarely unlearned. What goes unspoken does not disappear. It settles, it accumulates. Unaddressed issues do not fade with time, they ferment. They deepen roots in the heart and mind, turning small misunderstandings into permanent conclusions. Silence allows narratives to grow unchecked, and when people are left alone with their thoughts long enough, they will create meaning where none was clarified. Often, that meaning is loss. There is a moment when silence shifts from being confusing to being instructive. It teaches people where they stand. It teaches them what to expect. It teaches them how much emotional space they are allowed to occupy. And once someone learns that they are not worth a response, not worth an explanation, not worth the discomfort of honesty, they begin to prepare for absence. They stop sharing as deeply. They stop trusting as freely. They stop investing where there is no return. The tragedy of silence is that it often feels passive, but its impact is active. Silence makes decisions without words. It decides the tone of the relationship. It decides the level of intimacy. It decides whether someone stays hopeful or starts grieving. And many times the person who remains silent believes they are avoiding damage, not realizing that silence is slowly constructing it. Grief does not always begin with loss. Sometimes it begins with emotional withdrawal. People start mourning the relationship while they are still in it. They mourn the conversations that never happen, the questions that go unanswered, the effort that is no longer mutual. Silence trains them for separation long before separation arrives. By the time they leave, they have already done the emotional work of letting go. Silence also reveals priorities. When something matters, it finds expression. When it doesn't, it finds excuses. People may say they care deeply, but care without communication is incomplete. Love that cannot speak is love that cannot sustain. Silence eventually exposes what someone is willing to fight for and what they are willing to lose. When silence finally breaks, it is often too late. The opportunity for repair has passed because silence has already done its teaching. It has taught someone how to survive without reassurance, how to function without connection, how to heal without closure. And when the one who remains silent finally realizes what was lost, they often discover that the distance they created became the distance that replaced them. Silence is never neutral. It is always shaping outcomes. What is not addressed becomes what is remembered, and what is remembered over time becomes what is mourned. Avoidance does not eliminate responsibility, it delays the moment when responsibility must be faced. Growth operates on a schedule that cannot be permanently postponed. When someone chooses to escape difficult conversations, unresolved conflict, or personal accountability, they may feel as though they have bought themselves time. In reality, they have only deferred development. What is delayed does not disappear, it compounds. Every stage of growth requires confrontation. Not confrontation with others first, but with self. Escaping responsibility interrupts that process. It allows a person to remain emotionally comfortable while spiritually and relationally underdeveloped. They may appear functional on the surface, but internally they are avoiding the very pressures that would refine them. Pressure is not designed to destroy character, it is designed to reveal it. Avoidance rejects that refining process. When responsibility is postponed, patterns remain unchallenged. Habits go unexamined, wounds go unhealed. Instead of learning why they respond the way they do, avoidant individuals simply move away from whatever exposes their fragility. But what is not healed will be repeated. Escaping responsibility today ensures encountering the same lesson tomorrow, often in a different form, with higher stakes and fewer options. There is a false sense of control that comes with avoidance. By stepping away, a person believes they are managing the situation. But responsibility does not require proximity to function. It follows. The unfinished business of character has a way of reappearing in new relationships, new environments, and new seasons. You may change the setting, but you carry the same unresolved self into it. Avoidance also distorts maturity. A person may age, achieve, and advance externally, while remaining emotionally stalled. Growth is not measured by how much you accomplish, but by how well you handle what is uncomfortable. Responsibility is the weight that builds strength. Avoiding it may preserve ease, but it weakens resilience. Over time, even small responsibilities begin to feel overwhelming because the muscles required to carry them were never developed. Healing is especially affected by escape. Healing demands presence, reflection, and ownership. It requires acknowledging pain rather than outrunning it. Avoidance interrupts healing by keeping wounds open and unexamined. Pain that is not processed does not vanish, it settles beneath the surface, shaping reactions and decisions in ways the individual may not even recognize. What could have been healed in one season becomes a recurring source of dysfunction in the next. Responsibility also has a relational dimension. When one person avoids responsibility, someone else is forced to carry it. Emotional labor shifts unevenly. One person is left explaining, fixing, waiting, and compensating. Over time, imbalance erodes trust. Relationships cannot survive long-term where responsibility is one-sided. Escape may feel like self-preservation, but it often becomes a quiet abandonment of shared obligation. Delaying responsibility also delays purpose. Purpose requires reliability. It requires the ability to remain present when things are complex, demanding, or unclear. Avoidance trains a person to disengage at the first sign of strain. That pattern eventually disqualifies them from deeper assignments, deeper relationships, and deeper impact. Opportunities that require endurance bypass those who have proven they disappear under pressure. Eventually, responsibility reintroduces itself. It may arrive as loss, regret, or repetition. The lesson returns because it was never learned. Growth waits patiently, but it does not negotiate. The longer it is delayed, the more painful its arrival tends to be. What could have been shaped through conversation must now be shaped through consequence. Escape does not stop growth, it only postpones it. And postponed growth rarely arrives gently. Value is often invisible to those who live in constant access. When something is readily available, consistently forgiving, and endlessly patient, it can be mistaken as permanent. Familiarity dulls perception. People begin to assume presence is guaranteed, grace is unlimited, and opportunity has no expiration date. It is rarely until distance enters the picture that worth becomes clear. Many do not recognize value in the moment, because recognition requires attentiveness. It requires humility. It requires the ability to pause and say, "This matters." When someone is avoidant, their focus is usually inward, on what feels uncomfortable, demanding, or overwhelming. In that self-protective posture, they overlook the significance of what they are stepping away from. They are not intentionally dismissing value, they are distracted by their own desire for relief. Value is not always loud. Often it is steady. It shows up consistently, communicates openly, and remains committed even when it would be easier to withdraw. But steady things are easy to take for granted. When someone is accustomed to reliability, they may fail to honor it. They assume it will always be there tomorrow, so they postpone appreciation today. That postponement is where loss begins. Distance has a way of sharpening vision. When access is removed, perspective changes. What once felt ordinary now feels rare. What once felt demanding now feels meaningful. Absence reframes memory. Moments that were overlooked become highlighted. Effort that went unnoticed becomes undeniable. But by the time clarity arrives, the conditions that allowed access may no longer exist. There is a painful irony in delayed recognition. The same traits that were once avoided, depth, consistency, accountability, become the very things that are missed. The avoidant person realizes that what they labeled as pressure was actually investment. What they perceived as expectation was actually belief. What they ran from was not control, but care. Delayed recognition is not just emotional, it is instructional. Loss teaches the weight of what was mishandled. It reveals that value was not in perfection, but in presence. Not in ease, but in endurance. And once someone understands that, regret often follows. Not because the other person was flawless, but because they were faithful. Value is also tied to timing. Recognition must occur while access is still open. Once boundaries are drawn, recognition alone is no longer enough. Appreciation after departure does not restore opportunity. Insight after separation does not rebuild trust. Value acknowledged too late becomes memory instead of connection. Avoidance accelerates this process because it interrupts feedback. When communication is absent, appreciation is delayed. Gratitude goes unexpressed. Affirmation remains internal. Over time, the one offering value begins to feel unseen, and people do not remain where they are not valued. They may stay longer than they should out of hope, but eventually wisdom intervenes. When someone finally realizes what they lost, it is often because the standard has changed. They encounter others who do not offer the same depth, patience, or consistency. Comparison awakens awareness, but comparison cannot recreate what was once uniquely given. Value is not interchangeable. Each person brings something irreplaceable, and realization does not reverse replacement. Delayed recognition also exposes a deeper truth. Value does not beg to be seen forever. At some point, self-respect requires withdrawal. What was once offered freely is now protected wisely, and when that shift occurs, the avoidant person understands that escape did not preserve freedom. It cost them access to something rare. Value is always present before it is missed. The tragedy is not that people lose valuable connections, but that they only understand their worth when distance makes it undeniable. There is an order woven into life that cannot be bypassed without consequence. Growth restoration, and alignment all require confrontation, not confrontation driven by anger, but confrontation rooted in truth. Divine order does not reward avoidance. It responds to courage. When something is fractured, ignored, or misaligned, walking away does not restore it. Only facing it does. Avoidance may feel safer than confrontation, but safety is not the same as obedience to truth. Divine principles are not designed for comfort. They are designed for transformation. Throughout life, progress is always preceded by a moment of reckoning, a moment where truth must be acknowledged, named, and addressed. What is avoided remains unresolved, and what remains unresolved resists blessing. Confrontation is not about control, it is about clarity. When truth is confronted, confusion loses power, but when truth is avoided, confusion multiplies. Divine order thrives on light. Anything hidden, suppressed, or denied operates in shadows. Avoidance keeps issues in darkness, where they quietly grow stronger. Confrontation brings them into the open, where they can be handled, healed, and redirected. Many people believe that walking away preserves peace, but peace that is built on avoidance is fragile. It requires constant retreat to survive. True peace is not the absence of tension, it is the presence of alignment. Alignment comes when actions match values, when words match intentions, and when responsibility matches privilege. Divine order restores peace through alignment, not escape. Avoidance disrupts order because it removes accountability. When responsibility is avoided, imbalance follows. Someone carries more than their share. Something remains undone. A truth remains unspoken. Over time, disorder spreads quietly. Relationships weaken. Trust erodes. Purpose stalls. Not because the situation was too broken to fix, but because no one was willing to confront what needed attention. Confrontation is also an act of respect. It says matters enough to address. Avoidance sends the opposite message. It suggests that discomfort is more important than resolution, that personal relief outweighs collective responsibility. Divine principles honor those who stay present in difficult moments, who choose integrity over ease, and truth over temporary relief. Restoration is impossible without confrontation. Healing requires diagnosis. Alignment requires correction. Growth requires challenge. None of these occur through avoidance. When people avoid confronting their role, their behavior, or their impact, they block the very process designed to elevate them. Divine order cannot restore what is continually ignored. There is also a timing element to divine order. Opportunities for repair are not endless. Grace allows space, but space is not permission to delay indefinitely. When confrontation is postponed repeatedly, the window for restoration narrows. Eventually, consequence replaces conversation. Not out of cruelty, but out of order. What was once correctable becomes irreversible. Avoidance often masquerades as humility, but humility confronts truth. It does not hide from it. Humility says, I was wrong, I need to grow, I must address this. Pride avoids confrontation because it fears exposure. But divine order responds to humility, not fear. Growth flows where honesty is practiced. Confrontation also refines character. It reveals maturity, self-awareness, and strength. Anyone can leave. Anyone can disengage. It takes courage to remain present when emotions are high and answers are unclear. Divine principles elevate those who endure tension without abandoning responsibility. When avoidance replaces confrontation, disorder eventually speaks. It speaks through loss, distance, missed opportunity, and regret, not as punishment, but as correction. Divine order always seeks alignment. If truth is not confronted willingly, it will be encountered circumstantially. Alignment is restored not by running, but by returning. Returning to truth, returning to responsibility, returning to the courage to face what was once avoided. That is how order is honored. That is how growth is sustained. Loss has a language, and its purpose is not condemnation but instruction. When something meaningful is taken away, it is rarely meant to crush a person's spirit. It is meant to awaken it. Loss becomes a mirror, reflecting what was neglected, mishandled, or misunderstood. It reveals priorities with painful clarity and exposes the gap between intention and action. Many people view loss as punishment, but punishment seeks retribution, while instruction seeks transformation. Loss does not ask, "How do you suffer?" It asks, "What did you learn?" When approached with humility, loss becomes one of life's most honest teachers. It strips away denial and forces reflection. What comfort once concealed, absence now reveals. Loss teaches by removing illusion. While something is present, it is easy to minimize its importance, or assume it will always remain. Loss corrects that assumption. It shows that access is conditional, opportunity has limits, and relationships require stewardship. Through loss, people learn that what they once took lightly carried weight they failed to recognize. Instruction through loss is often uncomfortable because it bypasses explanation. There is no lecture, no warning sign loud enough to ignore. There is simply the absence of what once was. And in that silence, realization grows. Regret forms not because the loss was sudden, but because the signs were present long before the departure occurred. Loss also teaches responsibility. It reveals how choices, patterns, and behaviors shape outcomes. When something is gone, it becomes impossible to blame circumstances alone. Reflection turns inward. Questions shift from "Why did this happen?" to "What did I contribute to this outcome?" That shift marks the beginning of maturity. Without it, loss remains bitter. With it, loss becomes productive. Instruction through loss is not immediate. At first, there is resistance. People justify, minimize, and deflect. But over time, truth settles. Memory replays moments that were overlooked. Conversations that were avoided now feel necessary. Effort that was withheld now feels costly. Loss teaches through contrast, showing what was present by highlighting what is now missing. Loss also clarifies values. When something is gone, its absence exposes what truly mattered. It distinguishes between what was convenient and what was meaningful. This clarity reshapes future decisions. People become more attentive, more intentional, more aware of what they're willing to lose and what they must protect. One of the most powerful lessons loss teaches is timing. Some things cannot be recovered once they are gone. Apologies offered after departure do not carry the same weight. Recognition after separation does not restore trust. Loss teaches that insight delayed can be opportunity denied. That lesson, once learned, changes how a person approaches future relationships and responsibilities. Loss does not only teach about others, it teaches about self. It reveals patterns of avoidance, neglect, or entitlement. It shows where growth was resisted and where accountability was deferred. In this way, loss becomes a form of correction, redirecting a person toward deeper self-awareness and emotional responsibility. However, loss only instructs those willing to listen. Without humility, loss becomes resentment. With humility, it becomes wisdom. The difference lies in whether a person seeks understanding or validation. Those who listen to loss emerge refined, not hardened. They carry the lesson forward rather than repeating the mistake. Loss also teaches that value must be recognized while access remains. It reinforces the importance of presence, communication, and stewardship. Once something is gone, memory replaces experience. And memory, no matter how vivid, cannot substitute for participation. Loss is not an ending, it is a message. It speaks to the future as much as it reflects the past. For those willing to learn, loss reshapes priorities, deepens wisdom, and realigns purpose. It does not destroy, it instructs. Thank you for taking this journey of reflection and growth. May the wisdom you've encountered guide your steps forward. Goodbye for now, and may clarity, courage, and purpose walk with you into what's next. There comes a time when realization settles in, not as noise, but as truth. When the running stops, when the excuses quiet down, and when the heart finally admits what the mind avoided. Escape may have felt like relief, but relief is temporary, and loss has a way of teaching what comfort never could. What was once dismissed becomes deeply missed. What was once avoided becomes clearly valuable. And in that clarity, life offers one final gift: understanding. Let this understanding not harden you, but humble you. Let it refine how you show up, how you speak, how you stay. Growth does not come from regret alone. It comes from choosing differently when the next opportunity appears. Presence matters, responsibility matters, people matter, and what you nurture today determines what remains tomorrow. Thank you for listening with an open heart and a reflective mind. Goodbye, and may wisdom guide your choices long before loss ever has to.